Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to have so many people interested in this topic, the 3 secrets of the happiest retirees. My name's Eric Brotman. I'm the CEO of BFG Financial Advisors here in suburban Maryland. I see some familiar names on our guest list today, so welcome. And I also see there's some folks who I don't know, so I'm excited to get to know you. We're going to spend about 40 or 45 minutes going through these 3 secrets. And I'd like my co-host to introduce herself now as well.
My name is Marianne Oehser, and after 40 years of marketing career in the corporate world, I left the corporate world, and today I am a certified retirement and relationship coach, speaker, educator, and my mission is to help people live the happiest part of their life now. After 9 years, I've conducted numerous seminars and workshops and coached many people as they worked through the transition of adjusting to this new chapter of their life. I also conduct an annual symposium where I interview experts in the area of adjusting to the non-financial side of retirement. And my book was published last year. It's called Your Happiness Portfolio for Retirement. It's not about the money. Not that the money isn't important, but we leave that to Eric.
Thank you so much. Yes, both Marianne and I published books in the last year and have gotten to know each other through podcasts and a bunch of other media. And so let's get started. I've been doing this for 26 years, and my 3 secrets and Marianne's 3 secrets were identical. And so when we found each other, we realized just how much kismet there was. So if you would change the slide, we'll go to secret number 1. Secret number 1 is to be debt-free. Now, not all debt was created equal. There is such a thing as good debt and such a thing as bad debt. But let's talk about what it means to not owe anybody anything. If you'll flip the slide. Financial independence is a good thing. In my podcast, which is called Don't Retire, Graduate, we talk a lot about how retirement in and of itself shouldn't be a retreat or a surrender, but instead should be a movement forward into the next chapter of your life. Being financially independent and being retired, to me, doesn't mean not working. It means you don't have to work. It means if you're working, it's because you love it. It could be volunteering, it could be consulting. We're going to talk about a whole lot of that during the call today. But the single best way to be financially independent is to begin by not owing anybody a nickel. And so, we tell a lot of young people as they start to build their financial wealth that if you're starting with student loans and you're starting with debt, you're starting in a hole, and it's hard to build starting from a hole. So if you'll flip the next slide, path to freedom, there's a couple of steps that people can take if you are struggling with any type of debt, or even if you're not struggling with it, but you have it and it annoys you. The first is to do a very simple balance sheet. List your assets, list your liabilities, and then take the difference. Figure out what your net worth is. If your net worth is negative, that's clearly not a good sign for financial independence, and it means that there might be some more significant steps that need to be taken to get out of a debt hole. But assuming that your net worth is positive and your liabilities aren't zero, there's some strategies that you can take once you've got a true balance sheet. Determining how much you can afford. There's a really brilliant podcast out there called Afford Anything by Paula Pant. And what Paula says is, you can afford anything, but you can't afford everything. And I think that is so brilliantly simple. The truth is, if you decide that something's a priority and you make it a priority, you can afford it. But you can't do all of the things. You can't have everything be a priority. So whether it's housing, and housing is a big deal in retirement, deciding whether to snowbird, deciding whether to have 2 homes and have them smaller, deciding whether to downsize or to look at active 55 and over communities. There's a lot of choices, but housing is one of the biggest decisions that gets made. The next step here is to analyze the assets you do have. Which ones can either be liquidated or reduced or collateralized? Where can we get some debt relief? That might mean a refinance of either your home or some other debt. It might mean reverse mortgages or other strategies, some of which get a really bad reputation, but used properly can be helpful. Go ahead and change the slide for me, please. Then you need to look at what the debts are. You figured out where your assets are and what you might be able to use to pay down debt, but which one do you pay first? Everybody's got a different strategy. We've met people who pay their largest debt first and pay extra toward their largest debt just because it's bothering them. But is that always the best way to do this? Maybe you should pay the smallest debts first so that you have more cash flow because you have fewer payments. Or maybe you should pay the debts that have the highest interest rate, or the highest interest rate taking into account what is or what isn't tax deductible interest. Everyone's going to have a different outcome here, but in general, you want to order the debts by their priority of problem, if you will. Which ones are the most problematic? Credit cards are almost always first. If you have credit card debt, there is no good reason to carry that. It's the first thing that should go. 401k loans. If you've borrowed against retirement plans, that is a very expensive way to get capital and probably one of the last places I would go. So where do you go for collateral? You can go to your real estate in the form of a home equity line. You can go to your life insurance in the form of a cash value line. You can go to your securities portfolio in a securities backed line. There are lots of ways to collateralize property without having to sell anything or take tax burden and without really hamstringing your ability to become financially independent. And lastly here, create a schedule and stick to it. Have some accountability, whether that's your spouse or a close friend or your financial advisor or some other advisor. Create a schedule and stick to it because it creates accountability. It means that you are on the hook to make these decisions. So if we'll go to the next slide, there are 10 steps to building wealth. And the first one I already gave you. That's the first secret that retirees absolutely need to get right, is to avoid the adverse debt. There are a few others. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly because I want to get to secret number 2. But the next one is called pay yourself first. This is the idea that instead of paying your bills every month and then saving what happens to be left over, it is a better strategy to determine what your savings rate needs to be and to put money away into your own savings or investments before you pay your bills every month. If you can learn to live on 75 or 80 or 85% of what you make, every time you get a raise, you can then continue that strategy, continue that amount. You'll be paying yourself first and you'll learn to live on less than you earn. And that's number 3. Spend less than you make. What could be simpler? Whoops, if you could go back for me.
Sorry.
Spending less than you make, ultimately what this means is you can't build a financial castle if you're constantly digging at it. So you absolutely want to make sure you have positive cash flow. If you don't, there's only 2 ways to fix it. You need more income, which either means a raise or a second job or as the millennials today call it, a side hustle, or you need to reduce some of your expenses. Build a risk management plan. This is the moat around your castle. It doesn't make sense to build a tremendous amount of wealth and then to lose it over something that's easily preventable, a car accident, some kind of liability. You can't be bulletproof entirely, but to have a plan that takes into account your mortality, your morbidity, your health, long-term care issues, all the various things that can go wrong. And the biggest 2, frankly, are divorce and lawsuit. If you can avoid those, you're ahead of the game already. Diversifying amongst your type of accounts means that you don't only want to have one type. You don't want to only have a 401k or only have an IRA, because what you lack then is flexibility and tax planning. If all of your money's in the same kind of account, you will be at the mercy of Congress every single year to tell you what your tax rate's going to be. If you have lots of different kinds of accounts, you can choose when to use capital gains property, when to use ordinary income, when to take some tax-free income if you can build it. Diversifying among asset classes. This is sort of a back of the envelope kind of thing. And we all think, oh, don't put your eggs in one basket. That's where this is. Don't hold only one thing, one stock, one asset class. Expand into alternatives. A good portfolio should probably be more than stocks, bonds, and cash. Consider income investments. As you get older, transforming from an accumulator to a decumulator is a very tricky thing. It's relatively easy to do the math to figure out putting away X dollars a year for Y years at Z% gets you this mountain. What's hard to do is then to figure out how to spend it and how to utilize it. It's amazing how many retirees don't want to spend their own money because they feel like they're ripping branches off their tree. It's not ripping branches off your tree if you're just picking the fruit. Maintain a current estate plan. If there are any lawyers in the crowd today, really important to do this properly because unfortunately we don't know what our lifespan is going to be and we don't know how long we'll be healthy. And lastly, hire a team of people, a certified financial planner practitioner, an estate planning attorney, real estate agents, mortgage bankers or brokers, CPAs. Have a team of people, and more importantly than just having them, make sure they know each other and they work together. Where mistakes happen is where you have 6 terrific advisors, but they don't talk. It's like giving 6 musicians no sheet of music and saying, play something. It might not sound very good. If you go to the next slide, which is the last in my portion of secret number one. This is a little bit more about my book, Don't Retire, Graduate. A workbook is coming out shortly by that same title. And essentially, this is a blueprint. It's 21 exercises to get you from financial literacy to financial freedom wherever you're starting out. And fortunately, the book's been pretty well received. I'm pretty excited about it. So it's been a ton of fun. Let's go to secret number two. Marianne?
Well, just as Eric said, you are graduating when you retire. You're graduating into a wonderful new chapter of your life. And certainly the financial part that Eric was just talking about is extremely important. That's how you have the ability to be able to leave your career, whatever that was. But it's only half the story. You also have to plan for what you want that life to look like. So one of the first keys to that is understanding what your mindset is. Your mindset matters a great deal. Whatever your mindset is how you see the world. As you've all heard Henry Ford's quote of, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And it's the same thing with mindset. If you see this time of your life as a time of gloom and doom, that everything is over, the best part is over, I'm downhill, I'm out to pasture, I'm not important anymore, nothing I do matters anymore, the whole gloom and dooms, if you buy into that, what kind of a life do you think you're going to have? You'll create that kind of a life. But on the other hand, if you look at this new time as a blank sheet of paper where the possibilities are endless, it is a very exciting time of life. That's why I like Eleanor Roosevelt's quote, that the purpose of life is to live it, taste it, experience it to the utmost, to reach out eagerly and without fear for the newer, richer experience. And that's what I hope that your mindset is as you approach this new chapter of your life. So are you aging successfully? Well, do you think that there is a right and wrong way to age? The answer is there is. And so what does successful aging mean? It really means the capacity to function across all domains, physical, emotional, spiritual, every aspect of your domain, to do it in spite of what your medical condition is. And that's particularly important as we journey through the third chapter of our life. Now, this particular graphic comes from a book that I highly recommend. It was written by Roger Landry, Dr. Roger Landry, called Live Long, Die Short, a guide to authentic health and successful aging. Now, Dr. Landry is an interesting man. I interviewed him for one of my symposiums a couple of years ago. And he is what's called a gerontologist. He studies aging. But before that, he was the chief physician for the astronauts in the NASA program. And so I said to him, Roger, how did you go from being, the chief physician for astronauts to gerontology? It kind of sounds like the other end of the scope. And he said, oh, no, 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 no. On the contrary, my job when I was responsible for the astronauts was to keep them healthy. And the same thing is my job now, is to make sure that people stay healthy. And so the way that you read this graph is on the x-axis is age, and on the y-axis is how effectively you are functioning. And so it's no surprise that when you're very young, that's a pretty steep curve. You become more and more functioning as you grow up, and then you reach a plateau where life, you're functioning pretty evenly. You're not developing anymore, and you're just sort of living your life. Well, the traditional picture here was one of slow, gradual decline, the solid line. But what we have learned through a study called the MacArthur Foundation study, it was a study that was commissioned 22 years ago, actually. And in it, they studied 1,000 people that they felt were aging successfully. And they brought together a team of experts that were very knowledgeable in all aspects of our life. And together they studied what these 1,000 people were doing so that they were aging successfully. And that led to the fact that we now know that the line does not have to be a slow, gradually decline, but in fact, it can keep that steady line up at the top, almost until the very end, until, of course, it drops off. And that's for the purpose, that's the reason why Dr. Landry named his book Live Long, Die Short. So the MacArthur study actually changed the way we look at aging, particularly even the way that geriatric doctors, gerontology is the study of aging, geriatrics is the medical practice, medical specialty. Well, this study amazingly found that 70% of our physical aging and about 50% of our mental aging is determined by our lifestyle, the choices that we make every single day about what we choose to include in our life, what we choose to exclude from our life, and how we decide whether we're staying active or not active. How we plan this lifestyle, it truly determines how successfully you age. One of the other things that the study determined was that there were 4 factors that contribute to successful aging. The first one is stay physically active and have a mentally stimulating lifestyle. Now, we've all heard a lot about that kind of stuff, and so that's not a surprise. They also said having strong social engagements is very important. And in fact, now we know from a whole body of research that shows that the importance of social interactions is huge. It has a huge positive impact on both your mental health and your physical health. So it's that what that means then is that when you don't have those social interactions, when you are more socially isolated, it can be a real danger both to your mental and to your physical health. And those social research is showing that those social interactions are even more important now, especially after we leave the career phase of our life. And part of that is it becomes a bigger part of our life. But what it also means is, when we are in our career, of course we have our social friends that are outside of work, but we also have a whole network of interactions that we engage in with the people that we work with, the people that we serve in whatever way. And when we leave that career, we lose that network of interaction that we're used to having on a regular basis. And so replacing it with a new network of people is extremely important. And that can happen by taking classes where you meet new people, by joining organizations that are like-minded, whether it's a book club or a study club or people that like to paint or whatever it is, people that have the same kinds of interests, you will begin to nurture and build new friendships. Oops. The third is having purpose and meaning in your life. And one of the things that we know for sure is that is an exceptionally important thing, and we're going to talk more about that in secret number 3 because it is so important. The fourth aspect is choose an environment that's going to support that lifestyle. In other words, if the lifestyle that you choose is more outdoor activity and the ability to go running or kayaking or play tennis or whatever, then you probably don't want to live on the 40th floor in Manhattan, because that lifestyle isn't just as easy to accomplish. So it's about choosing, Eric talked about before, making a choice about where you are going to live in retirement is an important financial decision, but it's also an extremely important decision that is going to impact how successfully you age. So this is a happiness portfolio. Eric talked before about your financial portfolio, which he made an excellent point needs to be balanced and diversified. But your happiness portfolio is essentially your way of allocating the very important resource in your life, not money, that's Eric's job, but time. How are you going to fill the hours of your day, and what are you going to fill it with? And so your happiness portfolio talks about 8 extremely important life arenas. And you notice that finance isn't on here because, again, we're leaving that to Eric. But let me go quickly through them for you. The first one is professional. And Eric's going to talk more about that in a couple of minutes. But it's important because today we know, and the numbers are hard to get because of reporting, but we know through research that somewhere between 45 and 55% of people who are in, quote, retirement now are continuing to work in some way. It may be a continuation of what their career was, or it can be something totally different. Like me, my background is marketing. Right now, I'm a counselor, a coach, an educator. Very, very different skills that I needed to learn. But it is also something that is a passion for me. And so therefore, it's an important part of today's life, because the research projects that in the future, up to 75% of us are going to choose to work. And the idea here is that it's no longer has a stigma. When my parents retired, if you worked, it's because you had to work. It's because you didn't save enough money. It's because you didn't have a good enough financial plan. And people work now for all different kinds of reasons. So it's an extremely important decision that you make as you think about how you're going to allocate your time. The next important chunk is your primary relationship. Now, your primary relationship definitely goes through some transitions as you move into retirement. When I left the corporate career, which I mentioned before 9 years ago, I decided that I wanted to be a relationship coach, because although my first attempt at retirement ended up in gray divorce, I didn't want that to happen again. And so I studied for a year before I retired. I studied relationship coaching. But what I found as I was helping people, at that point I lived in Naples, Florida, as I was helping people there, couples would come in and I'd hear the story over and over again. We used to have a great relationship, and now all we do is bicker and fight. And what was the common denominator? They'd retired. And the problem is that most of us don't recognize how many things in our life are going to change when you make that big shift from your career to what this next chapter is going to be like. And when all of those things shift, you know, your relationship with, whether it's a primary relationship with the spouse or partner, or whether it's another important relationship in your life, those things shift. And one of the things that, the reason that gray divorce, by the way, is growing as quickly as it is, you may have heard the statistic, that the divorce over 50 today is 50% higher than it was at the end of the 1990s. So it's increased at a much, much more rapid rate than the increase in any other age cohort. And that part of that is the challenge of retirement. Part of it is the challenge of when all of those things change, people often make assumptions about what their life is going to be like, and they don't talk to their partner about it. And one of the big assumptions is, how much time are you going to spend together, we time, and how much time are you going to spend pursuing individual interests, me time. The balance of me time and we time is very important. Another assumption was highlighted by another couple sitting in my office one time, and they came in, and it's the usual story. We used to have a great relationship, and he was doing the talking, and she was sitting there with her arms crossed around her chest, and the more he talked, the stiffer her jaw got, and all of a sudden she spat out, "Why do I always have to do the laundry? I'm retired too." He looked at her in absolute disbelief. He had no idea what she was talking about. And what had happened is, she assumed he was going to be around more and going to have more time, and so he'd help her with chores around the house. He assumed, well, she's done this for such a long time, she must enjoy it. And so he didn't do any more, but they didn't talk about it. And that not talking about it is what led to, like a stone in your shoe, you know, when at first you don't notice it, and then it's there, and the more that's there, it feels like it's now a huge rock. And with their relationship, what happened is, something over him not helping with the laundry had grown into them bickering and fighting. And so one of the key things as you move into this new time of your life is to recognize that your primary relationship is going to be significantly impacted, hopefully for the better. I mean, one of the causes of gray divorce is, it's a very complicated issue, by the way, a very complicated issue, is that people have sort of grown apart. They don't know each other anymore, or they haven't addressed some of the issues that have been nagging their relationship all along. And now those things come front and center. I had a couple in my office one time that literally I was the last stop before the divorce attorney. And what we discovered very rapidly was the fact that they had lost touch with each other. They'd lost touch with the things that were important to each other. They had drifted in other directions. And through a bunch of exercises that we were doing, they were able to rekindle that relationship to the point that, today they would tell you that it is a far better relationship than it ever has been in their life. So I'm spending a lot of time on the primary relationship because it can derail everything. It can derail your financial plan, as Eric was saying, if you end up in the gray divorce statistic. So be sure not to take that for granted. Another important one is family and friends. I just talked about that from the MacArthur study that says that having a strong network of friends is important to your health for sure. And then you also want to address all of the other important life arenas. And the idea here is to take stock, if you will, look at where you are in each of those areas and ask yourself how happy you are on a scale of 1 to 10. How happy are you with the way that area of your life is working out now? And if it's not a 10, what can you do to improve it? And then lastly, because as I said, this is about allocating your important resource of time, to make a conscious choice about how much of your time you're going to spend doing the things that are important in each of these life arenas for you. And not all life arenas are going to be as important to you as others. Let's take for a professional, for example. My husband retired 2 years ago, and we go through our happiness portfolio every year at New Year's. And every year at New Year's for the last 2 years, when we get to professional, he says, I'm allocating 0 time to that because I'm not interested in doing that. My number is a fair bit higher than that. So it's all about recognizing how you want to invest in each area and then making it a living choice, periodically to look at how are you spending your life. At the end of the day, are you feeling like this is a fulfilling life to you? And then lastly, you'll notice that in the middle of this happiness portfolio is purpose. And so with that, I want to move to secret number 3, because purpose is a fundamental human need. It doesn't matter what your gender, your age, your ethnicity, where you are on the socioeconomic scale. It doesn't matter. It is important to each and every one of us. So don't ignore that as you are thinking about planning this time of your life. So, okay, what is purpose? This is a picture of a man named Richard Leider. And Richard Leider is one of the thought leaders, if you will, in the whole area of purpose. He wrote a great book called The Power of Purpose. And he, in fact, he is a consultant to the Blue Zones movement, if any of you know what the Blue Zones is. If not, I won't deter to that. But Blue Zones was very important in the community I used to live in. And part of what they did was offer free purpose workshops. The purpose workshops were designed by Richard Leider. And so my training in purpose comes from Richard Leider, actually. But the purpose is so fundamental to us. I once heard Jack Canfield, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Jack, talk about a story of a man named Ken Beering. And Ken Beering was a very successful automobile dealer in Wisconsin. He owned several dealerships. And he was fortunate enough to invest in property development, particularly in communities in California and Florida in the 60s. Well, Ken said that there were 4 stages to his finding happiness. He said the first stage was, I need more. I'm not happy. I'm not really happy, so I must need to buy more stuff. So we bought more stuff. And then after a little, that was fine for a while. There was a leap in his happiness. And then after a while, he said, yeah, I'm not happy anymore. So I must have to have bigger stuff. So he bought a bigger house and a bigger car and leap in happiness. And then he went back to where he was. Oh, I must have the wrong stuff. So we bought the Seattle Seahawks, the hockey team. And so, but that's still same story. And one day, one of his friends who had his own airplane asked him if he wanted to go along with him on a trip. The man was headed for Bosnia, and he had raised money for wheelchairs for the children in Bosnia whose limbs were either, horrifically damaged or they were blown up altogether. It was a terrible problem. And so Ken went along. And he tells the story of how walking into the first house with a wheelchair and putting a little boy into the wheelchair. And as he did that, the boy clung to his leg and tears were streaming down his face of gratitude. And Ken said, that day changed my life. And he went back and started the Wheelchair Foundation, which some of you may be familiar with. They partner with Kiwanis and Knights of Columbus to raise money for people who need wheelchairs all over the world. Well, Ken Beering will tell you today that he is truly happy, and it's because he found his purpose. That's how fundamentally important it is. So purpose and meaning are closely related. In fact, the terms are often used interchangeably, but there's a little bit of a difference. Purpose is, as Richard Leider said, the aim, the reason that you get up in the morning, sort of where you're headed. Meaning is a little bit more backward looking. When you look at something that happened in your life, did you find it meaningful? So purpose gives your life meaning in many ways. And so as you're doing this, as you're searching for what your purpose is, look for the things in your life that are meaningful to you. And then how to get in touch with it. Now this one, I spent hours and hours in seminars telling people this, but the quick answer is that there are three components. Identify your gifts. What are you just naturally good at doing? What do you do that you just lose yourself in the flow? You lose track of time. What is it that you care deeply about? Piece number two. What are you passionate about? And then look at what your values are. And when you can find something that satisfies all three of those, I'll be willing to guarantee that you have found your purpose. So purpose matters because for three reasons. First of all, it leads to a vigorous, healthy, long life, and lots of research has shown that. In fact, we know for a fact that people who say that they have purpose live 7 years longer than people who feel that they don't. You have a stronger mind. You are 240% less likely to contract Alzheimer's disease if you have a sense of purpose. You are much less likely to slip into depression. It also, number three, you'll have a healthier heart. You're 23% less likely to die of coronary disease and 73% less likely to die of stroke. Have I made the point that purpose is important to you? And so just as my last thought, a quote from Stephen Covey, on the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You can retire from life, but don't ever retire from making an extremely meaningful contribution to life. Over to you, Eric.
Thanks, Marianne. So just to recap, secret number 1 was to be debt-free and financially independent. Secret number 2 was self-care. Secret number 3 was purpose. And Marianne, I thought your happiness portfolio is unique, and I absolutely love it. And anytime I look at a pie chart, mine are very different than yours, but the idea is terrific. So let's talk a little bit more about purpose and specifically how it impacts folks who are contemplating a change and moving into retirement. I said earlier, and I'll say it again, retirement is not the absence of work. It's the absence of needing to work. People have said, I've read a number of folks in their 90s who are still working who said to them, retirement is a fate worse than death. Bobby Bowden coached into his 80s. And while he was there, people said, why aren't you retired? He said, because there's only one milestone left after this one, and I don't want that one to be next. So there's lots of theories around why this is important. To me, if you're financially independent, you've got a sense of freedom that will allow you to do anything you want. And that includes continuing to work if you love it. I know people who want to work till their very last day on earth, and other people who are in a job they can't stand and they can't wait to leave. I think life's too short to work in a job you hate. And I think there's no such thing as work-life balance. Work-life balance has been sold to us and it does not exist. So I think what's more important is work-life integration. Find ways to integrate what you do as a passion and a reason for your living, and it won't feel like work. It'll feel wonderful. And if you don't need the money and you're working for fun, it allows you to do some of the things that Marianne talked about that are philanthropic or that are meaningful in other ways. So go ahead and flip this for me if you would. If you love what you do, continue to do it. Just do less of it. Maybe that means working 3 days a week. Maybe it means taking certain projects on. Maybe it means taking summers off. It can be whatever you want it to do, but it's really important to keep your skills and qualifications and make sure they're up to date. I think one of the scariest places to be right now is to be 50 or 55 years old and to suddenly be out of work. It is no joke to try and find a job in a marketplace like this where there are people whose skills look more relevant than yours because of their recent education or because of their adaptation to technology of the day and so forth. Certainly there's no replacement for experience. I believe that for sure, but it's also really important to keep your skills up to date as you get older. Life can't be just about crossword puzzles to keep your head in the game. It's got to be more than that. What else can you do? Well, you have time, talent, and treasury. And the beauty of being a retiree or working in a lesser capacity is you usually have more of all three. You have more time than you've had since grade school. You have more treasury than you've had in your entire life. And by the way, you have more talent than you've ever had. So there are so many organizations that would benefit from having you, whether you're serving on a board or on a committee, or you're raising money, or you're fundraising, or whatever. Find the thing that gets you excited to get out of bed every morning. I worry that people who don't have a reason to get out of bed every morning stop getting out of bed every morning. And they start sleeping until 9 or 10 or 11. Next thing you know, they're sleeping their lives away. It's just not healthy. It's not good for you. I've told many, many clients over the years when we've helped retire them that it's important to plan for that a year or two in advance. Don't just decide one day I'm done. You must have a plan for the things that you want to do. It might be a bucket list of travel or things involving grandkids or things involving just things that you wanted to do in your life. You can transition into consulting. One thing I do know about being more senior is that number one, you have all of the experience, and number two, particularly past 65, you might not need benefits. So some companies will be very excited to bring you on as a consultant where they can pay you in a different way and where you can work as much or as little as you want. So you can decide whether you're working 20 hours a week or 3 projects a year. And then of course there's part-time as an option. If you're working because you want to and you love it, it will feel different than if you're working because you still have to make a mortgage payment or you still have to pay the bills. Flip for me, Marianne, if you would. Looking at the crowd today, I want to ask you a question you haven't been asked, some of you, in many, many years. What do you want to be when you grow up? We ask that of 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds. I don't know about you, but I was going to play football for the Baltimore Colts. That's problematic for lots of reasons right now. What do you want to be when you grow up? And if no one's asked you that in a while, you're not alone. But I encourage you to think about that. Think about what your purpose might look like. Think about how you might fill your time if you're not filling it with the day-to-day grind that you might feel you're in. Whether you're raising kids or grandkids, whether you're commuting to work. I mean, one thing that the COVID pandemic has shown a lot of us is how to work from home or how to function in different ways. And there'll be some positives that come out of that for sure, although to Marianne's point, social interaction has never been more strained and more difficult. Go ahead and flip for me. So here it is. This is it. The answers to all of it. Figure out what you want to be when you grow up and be it. Have a bucket list. Do the things you want. Travel, dedicate time to family, volunteer, learn, read, sing, dance, do anything that makes you happy. Joy is not something for the young. In fact, if anything, we now have more time and more money to do all the things we want to do, and if we've taken care of ourselves physically, we have the ability to do them in a whole different way. Do the things you always wanted to do and didn't have time for. I cannot tell you how many clients have waited for that rainy day and socked money away, and then by the time they've reached their retirement, they're not healthy enough to enjoy it. They can't take the trip. They can't walk that beach. It's okay to plan for the future. In fact, that's what I do for a living, is help people plan for the future financially. But you also have to live today, and there's definitely a balance to strike. So if you've paid yourself first and you are planning for the future, the rest of it Spend some things, do some things right now. Don't wait. The day may not come. And you can do anything. You can't do everything, but you can do anything. The only thing I beg of you is don't do nothing. That is no way to spend what could be a very long time. Financially speaking, remember that retirement was created at a point in time where folks didn't live past 70 or 72. 65 was basically arbitrary. People would collect Social Security and have a pension, and within 7 years they were deceased. Now they want to retire at 55, could live to be 107. What are you going to do for all of those years? So go ahead and flip that for me. And this, I'm hoping to tie in Marianne's remarks with my own. Being happy in retirement is not a coincidence. You have to plan for it. You have to plan ways to make yourself happy, not in a fleeting way. I mean, not happy like a kid with an ice cream cone who's happy for 3 minutes and then upset because it's gone. Real, true happiness, finding joy, requires some thought. It doesn't just, you don't have an epiphany necessarily one day. Planning for your purpose and planning for the things that are important to you are just as important as planning your finances. Marianne said it's not about the money. It's not about the money. It's important to have a financial wherewithal, and it's important to be stable and independent. But you can't take it with you. You know, he who dies with the most toys still dies. Make sure he played with his toys. So before you hand in your letter of resignation and you say, take this job and shove it, make sure you know what you want to be. Make sure you're going towards something and not just away from something. That retreat is a surrender, and it's not good for you. So with that, I think we want to open up the chat to any Q&A that we have. I think there are a few chats in the chat box. Sarah, I know you've been collecting some questions along the way. Let's unmute everybody's line and see if we can answer any questions that anyone has about either the financial or non-financial aspects of a successful retirement. Do we have questions in the chat box, Sarah? Sarah, you're muted. Everyone's still muted.
Got a question from Marianne. What are the challenges that could interfere with happiness in retirement?
Well, there are a number of them. We touched on a few, but certainly the first is if you buy into that gloom and doom mindset that I was talking about, you are going to live a life where you are simply unhappy about everything. And that gloom and doom research now tells us that if you choose that mindset, you are likely to compromise your health much sooner and often die much, much earlier. Another is to let your health issues get in the way. I mean, yes, is our health important to us? Clearly, it's important to do everything we can to maintain it. But should you have a situation where you are challenged with a health situation, don't let it get in your way. Quick story about someone that I knew who was, I met her when she was in her 80s, and she was the sort of a mentor in the Toastmaster group that I joined. And she had contracted COPD, and so therefore had some lung issues. And as the time went on, she had to have oxygen all the time and bring it along. That did not stop her from giving speeches. It did not stop her from being involved in the management of Toastmasters. It did not stop her from organizing things like a community event where we did speeches on Veterans Day to honor the veterans. She stayed engaged in the way that she could. So, you know, don't buy into the argument that just because you have a health challenge, although believe me, I understand the challenges, don't let it ruin your happiness.
Good question. Anybody else? I think we still have some muted lines. If you want to use the chat box to ask a question, you can ask it of Sarah. Sarah, were there others that came to you? Sarah, you're muted.
We do have a few comments. Someone suggested face all of your major unresolved issues as you approach retirement. Great point.
No, well, no question about that. I mean, not only issues in your relationships and with family and so forth, but also I think communication as you're planning for retirement is a multi-generational thing. It's real important to communicate with your grown children about some of what your plans are. It doesn't mean you have to quantify necessarily, but to qualify what's important to you. And it's real important, for example, in your estate plan to tell your kids or other people who's being responsible for different roles. Who's going to speak to a doctor on my behalf if I can, or who's going to handle my finances if I'm incapacitated. It's so much better to tell your family members and loved ones in advance what's coming than to have it be a surprise, either because you've passed away or you've been in an accident of some kind.
I have something to add to that.
Yeah.
About the intergenerational nature of it and talking to your children about what they expect. I had a client one time who was really looking forward to, she was single, and she had a daughter that lived relatively close who had some small children. And she was looking forward to spending more time with her grandchildren. Unbeknownst to her, her daughter was expecting her to be the full-time caretaker for her children. And so they hadn't communicated that. And so it put a strain on their relationship because they hadn't had that kind of communication of what kind of a retirement her mother really wanted.
We're approaching Thanksgiving. And while this might be a little different Thanksgiving than some because of the pandemic and so forth, it's still a time to be thinking about family and what's most important to everybody. And what I can say is nothing ruins Thanksgivings for the future faster than unpleasant surprises in legal documents or in a will, or when something goes horribly wrong. We've seen situations where kids inherit a family business or a farm or a piece of real estate, and then they argue about what to do with it, and there's no plan, and it really destroys relationships. One other thing I'll suggest that we hadn't talked about today is about legacy. We talked a lot about purpose, but we didn't necessarily talk a whole lot about legacy, and that is, what do you leave behind that's more valuable than money, that's more valuable than stuff? And to me, it's your stories, it's your values, it's your history. And if you haven't taken time to consider doing a video, it's more than just still shots and photography, but a video, something with audio. If I could hear my grandfather's voice right now, I'd give anything, and I can't. My daughter lost her grandfather very, very young, and he always had the camera. There aren't a lot of pictures. There's almost no video, and she doesn't remember him. Take a video of yourself just talking about the way you grew up and how you met your spouse, their mother or father, and all the things that were most important and what you want to leave behind. I think there is an incredible opportunity. That, to me, is more immortality than slapping your name on a building somewhere. That's just my thoughts. Marianne, I don't know if you have something to add to that.
No, I completely agree with that.
We have another question from Andrew. What are the main barriers which prevent people planning their life and how to overcome them?
I can take the non-financial part of that one.
I can take the financial part. After
you go for it.
Oh, all right. Well, financially, it's inertia. Financially, it's I think, a fear of taking that next step, and it's inertia. It is a scary thing to talk to your spouse about money in a very profound way. It's an even scarier thing sometimes to bring in a professional or a team of people. It doesn't matter how much money you have. There's a tendency to feel like you could have done better, or like you're somehow ashamed of what you've amassed. It doesn't matter how wealthy you are. I've heard the comedian Chris Rock once joked that if Bill Gates woke up tomorrow with Oprah's net worth, he'd want to jump out a window. Wealth is relative. Ultimately, I think there's a lot of shame involved. I think money is one of those taboo subjects people don't talk about, and done right with the right guidance and the right co-pilots, if you will, there's a definite opportunity to open communication and to solve some of that and to have an impetus to begin.
From the non-financial side, I believe that I know for a fact that part of it is the unrealistic expectation that people have of retirement. It's almost as though it's a Hollywood version. People often think of their whole retirement as being their bucket list. Bucket list is important, and it's really important. But I had one time a couple was in my office, and he said, "We've been retired for 3 years now, and we've done everything on our bucket list. What am I going to do for the next 25 years?" And so part of the overcoming that, and we also know from research that people spend more time planning a 2-week vacation than they do planning what their life is going to be like after retirement. And so how you overcome that, Andrew, is by being aware of it. I think many people were living under this false impression that that retirement was a perpetual vacation for the next 30 years. That's not how it works out. That gets old. And so then real life shows up on your doorstep, and people are like saying, oh, my picture of retirement isn't what I expected it to be. And that's when some of the challenges adjusting to it set in. So be aware of it and plan for it.
See a lot of questions coming in now.
Yeah, we've got a question from Marcy. What is the best retirement housing for people who are living alone if you live in a very high cost area and want to stay in the area that has very few housing options?
Well, that's a loaded question because everybody's a little bit different. When you're living alone and you're in an expensive area, sometimes it's impossible to get into a continuing care community or an active over 55 community, particularly if it's densely populated. One thing you might want to look at, though, in order to afford the nicest place you can as an individual, is find out if any building, whether it's a condo building or an individual home of some kind, find out if it's what's called HECM qualified, which is HECM. That's the home equity conversion mortgage. That's where you can actually do what's called a reverse purchase and put down some but not all of the funds, have no mortgage, and continue to live potentially in an expensive area with no mortgage payment. It's not a be-all, end-all. It's certainly not for everyone, but financially speaking, that sometimes creates a lot of options for folks, particularly folks who want to age in place. I would absolutely not do that with a property where you still have stairs, for example, or something where it might be difficult. If the 60-year-old version of yourself can't picture the 80-year-old version of yourself still living there, I would caution you not to use a strategy like that. What else?
Constance would like you to speak more about finding the reason to get out of bed in the morning.
You want to start?
Sure. It's a process. There's no question about it. It's the Sufi poet Rumi once said, "Be silently drawn to that which you love." And it's an internal reflection about what it is in your life that truly gives your life meaning, whatever that is. And then finding a way to have that in your life. Now, the purpose part also has a component of otherness. So it's not just about you, but it's about how what is meaningful to you can impact someone else. And it can be a small thing. I mean, I've often said that I didn't think I used to have purpose because I thought that purpose had to be like Gandhi or Mother Teresa, that you had to save the rainforest. And it doesn't. It can be a very small thing. But the point is that at the end of the day or the week, do you feel like there are things in your life that are meaningful, that have helped other people in some way, even if it's only one other person? The scope doesn't matter, but just find something that you enjoy that somebody else can benefit from.
That's a great answer. And Constance, I would only add that for me, I developed for myself what I call my personal energy plan, which is just a real simple 2 lines on a sheet of paper, and I started listing the things that give me energy and give me enthusiasm, and then the things that drain them. And you'll develop, when you do that, you'll develop patterns, and you'll find things that help fuel you in a creative way, a spiritual way, an energy way, a physical way, and you want to move toward those things that give you energy rather than sap it away.
We have a question about the best book, apart from your own, you'd recommend to a pre-retiree. Even on top of that, just any resources, the best places to find resources and how to know they're coming from reputable sources.
The best book apart from my own, I'd recommend Marianne's book. I guess that's still cheating. There's a book by Daniel Crosby, actually, and I quote it in my book as well, and it's about behavioral finance. And so if you're thinking in terms of the financial impact of this, it helps people understand how you make decisions and why we make decisions. It's why there are fountains in the lobby of every casino, because people make the same mistakes over and over again, and there are ways to learn from them and to learn how your behavior is impacting you financially. So to me, I would stick to the financial, and I'm sure Marianne has something more on the spiritual side.
Actually, I have a whole resource guide that I would be happy to send to anybody who would like it. Just send me an email. You'll have the email in a minute. And I'd be happy to send it to you. And it's a list of the books that I have found in my pursuit of this subject, which I have a great deal of passion for, and I've read an awful lot of them. And that's the list of the ones that I have the most, that I feel were the most meaningful for me.
That's great. I think we have time for about one more, Sarah, before we wrap up.
Okay. Do you have any resources you can recommend for finding those volunteer nonprofit opportunities in retirement?
Yes. I can send you my list. But one of the beauties of finding volunteer opportunities today is that there are a lot of, just like the business world has been transformed by the internet, so has the volunteer world. And first of all, though, I would say that even before the resource, it's important for you to understand for yourself what it is that you want to get out of volunteering. What is it? Why is it that you're doing it? And because that will help you to find the solution that is the best fit for you. But there are several online resources right now for matching people matching organizations that have a need with people that are interested. And some of them are local, and some of them are not. Some of them are gigs. In other words, do you want to design a T-shirt for Green Africa Project, a one-time thing? Others are ongoing things that you can contribute in it. And the range is, mind-boggling. It's all over the board. It certainly is not just unloading trucks at the food bank, although that's a very, very worthwhile and can be meaningful, but it's much more than that. There are so many, many ways that you can contribute to organizations. So search online, and again, send me an email. I'll send you my list of sites that I have found to be particularly useful.
I would also suggest for any of you to see if there is a community foundation in your town. Most cities have them, a lot of other municipalities do, but if there's a community foundation, they'll be able to plug you into all different kinds of options, and maybe the area of greatest need, or maybe just the area where you have the greatest passion. So there's definitely opportunities to do that. Marianne, why don't we go to the next slide as we start to wrap up. Just real briefly, a little bit about BFG Financial Advisors. For those of you who don't know us, we aim to empower families, and we aim to do it through financial planning. We begin with financial literacy. We want everyone to understand and learn how this works, do some planning, and ultimately find financial freedom. We're happy to send out, or you can find online, a guide of resources for us, everything from free resources like podcasts and blogs and documentation and ebooks on taxes and so forth, to things that are inexpensive like books and courses, all the way on to financial planning engagements or wealth management engagements. We'd love to work with you. Brotmanmedia.com is a place to check out my podcast. Every Thursday we have a new episode of Don't Retire, Graduate. It's free. Also write for Forbes.com, and that's free content. And if you're interested in how to pay less taxes legally, if you go to lowtaxbook.com, you can download a resource, and it's 4 strategies most Americans can use. I found it's mostly true for our Canadian viewers today too, but that most Americans can use to pay less income taxes down the road. So with that, I'll let Marianne close as well.
No, retire and be happy. We provide information and guidance as you move through that transition from your life before in your career to this third chapter of your life. I focus on individual coaching, do a lot of that, live workshops and seminars, and an online one. But if you go, we were talking about resources a minute ago. If you go to my website, retireandbehappy.com, there's a section for resources, and you can download the ones I was just talking, and not the volunteer one. I guess I should put that up. But you will find a lot of resources there as well. And again, if you have any questions that I can assist you with, I'd be happy to talk to you and see if I can point you in the right direction. So don't hesitate to give me a call either.
And with that, our contact information is on the screen. Marianne, thank you for being amazing to work with. I enjoyed this. And thank you all for joining us. Hopefully you got something out of this presentation, financially and non-financially, and hopefully it was the right marriage of those two. So thank you for joining us today.